This podcast is all about a link that I put in my newsletter that became the most clicked on link of all time. And so it's my investigation into why so many people clicked on it and why the link was so popular. This is Zestology, the podcast all about energy, vitality and motivation. I'm Tony Wrighton, walking around the park in London, and the link was to a product on Amazon, simple Amazon link for a product called Restore that looks after the gut. And so I put the link on my newsletter a few weeks ago and it became the most clicked on link of all time. And then I put it in the week after and even more people clicked on it the week after. If you don't already get it, I send out this 3 zesty things email each Monday, which is just kind of 3 things that might help you feel a little bit more zesty, hopefully. And if you want to sign up for that, you can go to tonywrighton.com. And this link was to a product called Restore. Now, I'm no scientist, as you know if you listen to this podcast, and I'm probably going to completely mangle the description of this product. But essentially, it's not a probiotic, it's not a prebiotic, but it's something that most closely resembles dirt. And so when you swallow it, it's kind of taking your stomach back to a more primal state. Yeah, I think we need an expert to talk about this. Because so many people clicked on the link, I thought, you know what, we're going to have to investigate this in a bit more detail. So I got in touch with the guy who invented it. He is Dr. Zach Bush, and he's a triple certified scientist and physician. I didn't even really know what that meant, but now I do. Triple certified is massively awesome in the world of science. It means you really know what you're talking about. And for years he was a scientist and a university lecturer. And then partly because of the kind of discoveries he was making in his research, he started setting up his own clinics. And you'll hear, actually, right at the start of this podcast, when he started setting up his own clinic and looking after people nutritionally, his colleagues, the other triple certified scientists, started laughing him out of town. But then, because he's approaching things from such a different perspective, he stumbled upon something incredible. Now, if you haven't clicked upon this link yet and you want a bit of context for this podcast, then you can simply go to Amazon and search for Restore, which is this gut product that's kind of made out of dirt. Yeah, I know I'm not explaining it very well. Just go and check it out, and check out the hundreds of reviews from people who've said they've used it and it was great. I'm not saying that it will work for you. It might well not. I'm not on any commission for this. I am taking it myself, and I think it's very interesting. I've noticed small results so far, but I think it's something that could be very interesting, and I know a lot of people that I respect are very excited by this. Just before we get into this podcast, I'm going to give it a Zestology Geek rating, a Zest Geek rating of 7 out of 10. Which means that at times things get quite technical on this podcast because Dr. Zach Bush is so highly qualified that he knows what he's talking about and he's explaining why this stuff works. Bear with it because it's awesome and you'll find out exactly why it's good. He's also a very interesting man himself and has some interesting lifestyle practices. And also, just before we get going, very excitingly, this week is the week when we are giving away an infrared Juve light worth $1,000 anywhere in the world. So wherever you are listening to this, you could, in about a week's time, be celebrating the fact that you now are the proud owner of a Juve infrared light. And we'll pay for shipping and we'll pay for import taxes, which might be huge, but I'll do that, because that's the kind of guy I am. More on that later in the podcast, in the middle and at the end as well. But if you want to enter right now, just simply post on Instagram and tag Zestology. But more on exactly how to enter coming later on. For now, here is Dr. Zach Bush with a geek rating of 7. Not Zach, but this podcast. Here he is.
When I started my nutrition center, which was in 2010, there was almost hilarity among my colleagues at the university when I said I was leaving to start a nutrition clinic in rural Virginia, which is one of the poorest areas in the country.
Hilarity.
Yeah, I mean, it was just like, you can't start a plant-based diet thing in the middle of, chicken world where everybody's growing Tyson chickens. And it was ridiculous concept at the time. And there was the lectures that I was giving towards the end of my tenure at the university level was, about health and healing and nutrition, and nobody would come to my lectures. Whereas, when I was lecturing in cancer and on cancer pathways, you pack a house. So there was just a lack of interest, I would say, at that time. So it was so little interest that it wasn't even controversial. It just seemed ridiculous.
So what did they think? They thought, oh, he's the hippie who wants to go off and save the world by getting people to eat right.
Yeah, and I have a tendency to think and dream big and talk big, global health rather than individual health. So people kind of were able to say, oh, that's just Zach on his high horse and on some pipe dream of getting the world healthy. And so I think that was kind of the general tenor. There was growing concern in the cancer world at the time, which was interesting, in that UCSF and UCLA, these universities out in California, were starting to release some pretty profound genomics information on the gut that was suggesting that if you were lacking some bacteria in your gut, or you were overexpressed with other bacteria, that we could predict which cancers you would get. And so if you had these bacteria, you were likely to get breast cancer. If you were missing these bacteria, you're likely to get colon cancer.
Yeah.
These correlations seemed completely out of left field, and they frankly were at the time, because even to this day, the dogma in the cancer field is that this is a genetic disease. It's a genetic injury that can lead to a cancerous process. So that's kind of the overall viewpoint that we were struggling through, and this was a clear anomaly on the horizon, that somehow, some way, these bacteria were involved in carcinogenesis and how these cancer cells were starting to form. And the realization came when we started diving into the story of soil. We were kale juicing my patients into oblivion. So much kale juice and cruciferous vegetables, and I was pretty sure they were going to
by kale juice.
Yeah, kale juice and sautéed kale, and broccoli sprouts, and just going after them. And a third of them would respond beautifully, just like the textbook suggested should. And not that there were really textbooks, but certainly the bulk of the evidence that we had coming out of the 1960s, 70s, and 80s around nutrition, it was clear that these cruciferous vegetables and the like had a profound cancer-killing effect. And so we had people that were responding beautifully to nutrition, but then there was this large chunk that were getting worse, not better. Yeah. And that was very confusing. Anytime you see the opposite effect of an intervention, you have to start wondering if we have the right model or paradigm that we're practicing in. So with that, we started to ask the simple question of, well, is there something, fundamentally changed in the kale that this population can't handle it? And that's when we started asking questions about the nutrients in the kale, to find out that, wow, the nutrients have really dropped, specifically the alkaloids. And the alkaloids are a family of molecules that are made within the bacteria, the fungi, of the microbiome of the soil and the microbiome of your gut, as well as in the plants. And so the idea that, wow, for the last 20 years, somehow we've completely destroyed our ability to make the chemotherapeutic compounds, the antihypertensives, the antidepressants that are naturally occurring alkaloids in our food have suddenly disappeared.
Because the soil is just changing so quickly.
That was the thought. It must be that we're killing the soil. And so as we were going through the soil science, we ended up finding a family of molecules made by the bacteria and fungi that looked to have the potential to have the same redox potential that I just described from the mitochondria. And this was a big goosebump moment for me, because I had been kind of really at one of the forefront universities for this mitochondrial apoptosis kind of model, and nobody had ever mentioned any other organism than a mitochondria producing some kind of compound like this. The one exception being nitric oxide, which is produced by the human body when you exercise. And so to have a new family of molecules was a profoundly kind of goosebump moment, especially when I found out that those were being made by the bacteria and fungi. The bacteria and fungi don't have mitochondria. And so this was a very interesting moment where you realize, okay, if there's going to be 40,000 species of bacteria that's living amongst 500,000 species of fungi, they would have to have some mechanism of species-to-species communication.
So by the microbiome talking, what you're in layman's terms, do you basically mean different parts of the body talking to each other in terms of energy?
Yeah, and even, at the more micro level, the fungi within your gut, it turns out you have a lot of fungi and parasites and bacteria that should be living inside your intestines.
Mm.
They need to be in crosstalk. They need to be saying, okay, I need a little niche help from Clostridium over here. I need a little Klebsiella over here. I need a little Candida over here. I could use a little bit of spirochete over here. And so the ecosystem should be constantly rebalancing, based on the hormonal state of the larger
Got
organism,
it. Yeah.
the human. It should be shifting based on what time of day it is. It should be shifting on the pH of the stomach contents. And so your microbiome should be this hugely dynamic, life force within you.
And are we not? And is it not very dynamic in this day and age?
We've slaughtered it. And the main rationale or mechanism by which we've done that is through the antibiotic science. And so the antibiotics, you'll remember, are made by fungi. And so bread mold was the one that produced the first one, which was penicillin. And so the molds will produce antibacterials. The antibacterials should produce the anti-yeast and anti-molds. And so we now have whole populations that are overgrown with weed-like organisms, including yeast and other invasive bacteria, because they're lacking this microbiome balance.
So when you go inside someone's gut and there's just none of that variation, it's just stripped out.
That's a monoculture. Yeah, we've really created these monoculture environments. And so certainly some of the antibiotic problems from physicians. In the United States, we prescribe about 8 million pounds of antibiotics a year. That's disgusting. That equates to 833 prescriptions of antibiotics per 1,000 men, women, and children. And so it's an incredible saturation of our population in antibiotic.
By pounds, you don't mean British pounds as in the currency. You mean the weight.
I'm talking about the weight. 8 million pounds of antibiotics are put into just through prescriptions.
Okay, yeah.
That pales in comparison to how much we're putting into our meat and industry. So if you look at the poultry, the pork, and the beef industry, we're putting somewhere around 30 million pounds of antibiotic per year into the food chain. And so we are saturating our bodies through our food and through our physicians with antibiotic. But those numbers, a total of maybe 40 million pounds now, pales in comparison to the main antibiotic used worldwide, which is glyphosate. This chemical is the active ingredient in Roundup, which is the famous herbicide weed killer that's gone worldwide. It turns out that Roundup and the glyphosate active ingredient has never been patented as a weed killer. It's only been patented as an antibiotic, antiparasite, antifungal. And so this one compound now worldwide accounts, depending on who you talk to, somewhere around 2.5 billion to 4.5 billion pounds per year. And so you are logarithmically drenched in glyphosate compared to the antibiotics in your environment. And the terrifying thing is that this toxin or this antibiotic, glyphosate, is water soluble. And on a planet that's 70% water, this is very bad news. It means that it gets into our water systems, it gets into our air we breathe, it gets into the rain clouds, it comes down in the rain. In the agricultural environments within the United States, we're now at 75% of our air is contaminated with Roundup and 75% of our rainfall is contaminated with Roundup. And that doesn't even consider our drinking water, the food we eat, and everything else. Weed killers should not have been on our food, right? And it wasn't until 1996 that became an option when we genetically modified corn, soybean, and the sugar beet to be able to handle Roundup. So we called those Roundup ready crops. So for the first time in agricultural history, going back thousands of years, we were spraying our food crops with an artificial chemical. The whole circle loops back around on itself right here, because I mentioned that much of the reason our patients weren't responding in a healthful manner to what we thought were the superfoods of the planet was because they were missing alkaloids. Well, it turns out that the alkaloids, the medicine within our food, is literally made by the same enzyme pathway that is blocked by glyphosate. And so in one swoop, we've destroyed the microbiome in the soil, we've destroyed the microbiome in our gut, and we've blocked the ability of the bacteria, fungi, and plants to make the medicines within our food. And so now we're eating food that no longer kills cancer, it no longer treats depression, it no longer is thy medicine, like Hippocrates said 2,000 years ago. And so we're really in this depleted state, and it's probably not a coincidence that Monsanto, which is the primary sales force historically for glyphosate, which isn't the case anymore, by the way. It went off patent in 2007. All of the major chemical companies in the United States and worldwide now make this chemical glyphosate. The vast majority comes out of China now. And so glyphosate worldwide, though, historically is from Monsanto, and Monsanto throughout its course has been owned by the pharmaceutical industry. And so imagine this business plan where you buy up or own a seed company that produces food that is inherently depleting the soil of its medicine and the plants that would grow there of its medicine, so that the pharmaceutical company can then extract from large production facilities those same nutrients that are literally coming out of the plants. For example, vincristine, one of the chemotherapies I used a lot when I was in the research world, vincristine comes from algae. But algae, when exposed to water systems full of glyphosate, can't make vincristine. And so the way in which the pharmaceutical companies do this now is they grow up huge vats of algae in controlled, well taken care of swamps, if you will, of the algae, and then they extract the vincristine. And vincristine is now selling for $28,000 a gram, which is many times more expensive than gold. And so here's a compound that has always been in the green foods that's now not there because we have an ecosystem drenched in Roundup. And so now we have, this huge market demand for chemotherapy.
And this is what Restore, the product that you really invented, is actually starting to do with the gut. It's starting to bring back some of those missing nutrients and bacterias that should be in the gut but aren't, because of glyphosate and because of antibiotics. Is that right?
Well, it's interesting. Restore, was the discovery for Restore was not a bacteria or fungi. It was actually these carbon molecules that can function as redox signaling molecules.
What does that mean, redox signaling molecules?
So this is literally the wireless network between the cells. Okay. Think of your cell phone for a second. We're talking about human cells and bacteria, but let's switch now to the cell phone. The cell is a computer that has a reception and a transmission capacity to it, and that reception transmission always works within the phone. But if you're more than 7 miles from your closest cell phone tower, suddenly the thing is dysfunctional as a communication unit. You can no longer talk to anybody, you're isolated, and the computer system and your life start to fragment. You're now missing meetings, you're missing the phone calls, because you're not connected to the larger network. That's literally what happens with cancer. As a cell in the body becomes isolated away from the communication network, it will start to lose its self-identity and its role within the community, and it will quickly start to accumulate injury. It will start misfiring. It's not living to its purpose and potential now because it's disconnected from the communication.
Okay.
That wireless communication network within the human body is largely based on these redox molecules. That word means reduction and oxidation, and then we contract that to redox. And so reduction is the donation of an electron to any biochemical process, and oxidation is the tearing away or absorption of an electron. And so in redox signaling, you have molecules that have a balanced number of negative and positive charges that can pass electrons through biochemical environments. Like
my non-scientific brain is just about keeping up here.
Yeah. So if you have a non-science background, you just keep coming back to that cell phone, and understand, we're just getting disconnected literally. And so Restore is the communication network from bacteria and fungi. The reason this is such a unique approach to not just gut health, but vascular health and support of the blood-brain barrier and neurologic health is because it's not trying to do anything. The wireless communication from your cell phone tower never is the thing that engages the phone call to tell you that your mom's calling. It's just passively sitting there to pass on the signaling from your cell phone to mom's distant cell phone.
Yeah.
So that's exactly what redox molecules and Restore are doing. This is much different than a probiotic, which is micromanaging ultimately to create a monoculture within the gut again. Probiotics, which are a $30 billion industry now, have really little science behind them, because how could they possibly bring gut health, and that they only represent 3 species, sometimes 5 or 7 species of bacteria at huge repetition. And so you might be looking at 35 to 50. There's now a couple on the market that brag that they have 1 trillion copies of the same bacteria. Well, that's not that's nowhere near an ecosystem. That's not anywhere remotely close to what you would call gut health. And
so
yet
we shouldn't even be taking probiotics?
I discourage the use of probiotics for any kind of chronic use. If you get exposed to a viral infection, a big GI viral infection, you get exposed to chemotherapy, antibiotic, you get a big hit to the microbiome, I'm fine with you taking a few days or a couple weeks at the most of a probiotic. But you keep stringing that out as a chronic therapy, you're going to narrow that ecosystem.
Yeah. And
so the is a sterile product. And so we're not trying to add bacteria. We're not trying to add fungi. We're just putting the intelligence back into the system. And it's remarkable what we've seen over the last 8 years of clinical use. It's just an extraordinary journey of how intelligent the microbiome is in its relationship to the human body. We now have shown that Restore changes the signaling within mitochondria. It has the opposite effect at the mitochondrial level in a cancer cell versus a healthy cell. So it's really the first compound we've ever seen that has this intelligence to it that seems to know whether a cell is really damaged or is healthy, and it's going to signal the mitochondria within that cell to do something different. That's a really unique intelligence that we've never seen. All of the chemotherapies I've ever used, other things like even in the integrative medicine world, like vitamin C, hydrogen peroxide, these compounds do the same thing in every single cell they touch. Restore is extremely unique in this redox signaling world in that it can, inform the entire environment such that it's responding in like kind and in appropriate response to. And so to see a compound that can get these mitochondria within cancer cells to overcome that threshold effect where they couldn't previously kill themselves, to overcome that and induce this apoptosis program, cell suicide, is a really phenomenally interesting thing that the body is always trying to do that, and all it's lacking is a wireless communication. The FDA and a lot of the regulatory bodies, say if it's a dietary supplement, you cannot claim that it changes the course of disease, it can't treat, diagnose, etc. And Restore might be the only supplement on the market that's 100% compliant with that, because it's not doing anything. It's literally the most passive compound you'll pull off a shelf. And that's exciting to us. That passivity of it has accounted for its safety. It's actually safer in cell culture and renal tubule cells than water itself. And so it's a really profoundly balanced and eco-friendly compound because it's so passive.
And Zach, I have to tell you, I put I send out this 3 zesty things email every week, and I put a link to this in one of the emails, and I think it was the most clicked on link that I'd ever put in my emails. That people are so interested in it, they're so looking for something different in gut health, and when you look at the reviews, they are overwhelmingly positive, which is what got me excited as well. Someone who's had a very indifferent gut over the years. The reviews are really positive.
Absolutely, and it's humbling. Everybody goes into medicine wanting to make a difference, and the interesting thing that I find in life is the less we try to do, the more effective we become. And so as physicians and as scientists and as healers, it's stepping out of the way of normal biology that makes the healing happen. And that's how I feel about Restore, and the incredible gift it's been to so many people, is that this is literally me and our whole science team stepping out of the way. We're no longer telling you to micromanage your diet. We're not micromanaging your microflora through probiotics. We're simply saying, let's see how intelligent your intrinsic health is. In fact, we've developed a whole program now through my clinics that runs online for global health called the Intrinsic Health Series, with the realization that in all avenues, if we start to step out of the way of the individual's inherent capacity for healing within, and then give you a toolbox, not just Restore, but a whole toolbox of approaches and techniques to plug back into that inherent innate intelligence that you have, that has become an extremely effective and really joyful journey as a physician and healer.
And so I'm still trying to kind of in really simple terms work out what it is, because I can tell I'm on a very small dose at the moment. I'm taking quite a small bit because I can just tell there's something going on when I take it. But it's essentially kind of going back to my roots. It's quite swallowing dirt. Is that like a too simplistic way of putting it?
No, not at all. And so that's where we draw this from. So we're pulling this out of 50 million year old soil. That's a fossil layer in the desert of the United States. And so we draw out the molecules from the fossil soil, and then we bring them to our labs and production center in Virginia and put them through a whole series of mineral catalysts to get the redox signaling effect built back into that compound. And so what's happening is you're taking these molecules back to their original state that they would have been produced by the bacteria and fungi 50 to 60 million years ago. If you think about that for a moment, it's a pretty massive goosebump moment, because the biome has actually been collapsing long before modern farming. The dinosaurs went extinct largely because of a collapse of the topsoil that happened when the whole soil got covered with a layer of dust that led to a hypoxic event. And so we lost, some unknown amount of species variation in the soil with that event, and we suddenly lost a lot of plant life, and the density of the soils dropped, and we had a huge die out before, over time. And then, of course, modern agriculture starting, 1100 years ago, we have steadily been killing the soils in which we live by poor crop rotation and the rest. And so that's a interesting journey. And so it's an exciting thing. Like you said, when you put that in your mouth for the first time in those first couple of months on the product, you are sensing that you are changing back into something different. You are plugging back into something that humanity has literally never plugged itself into. We should have bacteria and fungi. We should have their redox signaling molecules within our gut, within our bloodstream, within, communicating across blood-brain barrier, etc. And we've had that in diminishing amounts for hundreds, if not thousands of years.
Just interrupting this podcast for one moment to remind you that today's podcast is brought to you by Juve infrared lights, and it is your chance to actually win one today. Very exciting. I got in touch with Scott, the owner of Juve, and I said, look, it'd be quite nice to give away an infrared light worth $1,000, and he very kindly said yes. So just in case you haven't heard me mention infrared light in the past, it uses the latest LED technology to basically improve your fitness, improve your health, and your skin as well, very interestingly. Also, I think one of the things that people are really using this for at the moment is for healing. So if you've got any kind of cut or bruise or broken leg or whatever it might be, you can use a Juve to heal. And also, as I walk around London and the big lorries kind of drive past, I think it can help you with getting rid of toxins and generally sharpening up your health as well. We'll pay for shipping anywhere in the world to the winner. We'll even put the import charges as well. All you need to do is upload a picture of Instagram with you using or talking about your favourite zesty energy hack. It might be some earplugs so you can sleep better. It might be a particular supplement or a book that you love or you're just feeling enthusiastic about at the moment. Picture that on Instagram, tag Zestology, and you could be winning this Juve in the next week or so. We'll pick a winner, and anywhere in the world we can ship it to, so that's pretty cool, isn't it? Make sure you mention at Zestology or at Tony Wrighton, or both, when you post this picture on Instagram. That's it. Back to the show. This theme of kind of going back to our roots, getting closer to nature and moving away from antibiotics and modified food and modified light and water and everything else seems to be one that crops up again and again on this podcast in terms of more energy. I mean, is this something that kind of manifests itself in other areas of your life in terms of how you eat and how you align your circadian rhythms and what you do for exercise and stuff like that?
100%. The source of all energy on Earth is really only one. You could argue maybe two, but it's ultimately from suns, right? Namely from our sun, but the electron force that comes in through our atmosphere is really the only thing that exchanges across our layer of intense blanket that we have that wraps this planet up. So every molecule of water, every chemical compound on Earth, everything started here. We can shuffle the deck chairs chemically and we can make man-made chemicals, but the actual elements have all been here since the beginning of Earth time. You could argue maybe meteorites hit occasionally and bring in some new information or mineral, But really, the only thing coming and hitting Earth new is this huge electron flow of energy from the sun and distant stars that flow in not just from sunlight, but through the aurora borealis or the northern lights. That ion exchange that's pouring into our atmosphere to create the northern lights is a huge, huge current of electrons pouring in from solar flares and distant galactic events onto planet Earth. That's then, captured by the bacteria, the fungi, and the plants, and that puts the energy into our food. And so now think about our food chain and what we're doing to it. We grow these in very abnormal environments for our meat production. Our chickens never see the sunshine. Our pork never sees the sunshine. Our cows see less and less of any sort of healthy ecosystem around them. But you think especially about the poultry industry, which is the single largest meat production industry on the planet. It's 7 times larger than the beef industry. This massive, massive poultry industry, our food is never seeing its main source of energy in the sun.
Yeah, that's dreadful.
And so you start to realize the food that we're putting in our mouth is calorie rich, but energy deplete, if you will. And so
does that mean you only eat organic meat?
Yeah, I actually don't eat meat. I really try to get as close to the soil as I possibly can. The downside of meat are many now because we live on a toxic planet. The higher you eat on the food chain, the more toxin is invariably embedded in that. And the concept of organic, where I'm actually a executive producer on a documentary right now that we're shooting on the Mississippi River and all of the agricultural environment of the United States. It's profound when you start to look at what we call organic farming is far from good soil practices often. So we are still in a very artificial environment when we have an organic stamp on our food. So, and I don't know if you followed this recently, but the USDA recently allowed the hydroponic systems to now be called organic. Now, a hydroponic system, much like we talked about the chicken, now we have tomatoes and vegetables and fruits that are growing in covered areas that don't get the sunlight like they would out in an open field, are never touching soil in their entire lifespan, and we call that an organic food. And so it's a real decimation of nature happening in our entire food system. And so this is a real big problem. And so really my first encouragement to all of you, if you want to do one thing to increase your energy level, it would be to plant a garden in the backyard. If you start getting yourself reconnected to food independence on even a tiny level, if you grew 0.001% of your food per year, you would increase your energy level. That's currently the average in the United States. 0.001% of our food is grown in backyards. That's pales in comparison to the 45% of our food chain that Europe and the US were growing in our backyards at the end of World War II. And so we need to go back to the victory garden concept of World War II and say, if we want independence, if we want victory, if we want humans to survive, then we need to go back to food independence. We need to start growing it ourselves. If you don't have a garden or you have no room for a garden, then grow a couple plants in your window and meet a farmer. Get attached to one of these community service agricultural programs or a farmer's market near you. Meet a farmer, and I'm talking about not just meeting their food. Don't just buy their food. Actually talk to that farmer. Talk to them about their soil practices. How are they building carbon life back into their soils? Really get engaged at a deep community level, and we can quickly turn this thing around. We certainly did in World War II. We quadrupled the amount of food we were producing in backyards over a short 6-year period. And so we could really turn this thing around quick with shows like yours, Tony, and others across the world that are starting to get this message out. Is we need to, as communities, stop thinking about supplementation all the time and start thinking about how do we rebuild a foundation of connection to the nature around us for our children. Our children's generations are not going to survive. We are looking at 1 in 3 children with autism by 2035 at our current trajectory.
What you were saying about it's very interesting, about the overgrowths of certain bacteria and then a kind of undergrowth of other bacteria in the gut. I don't know if you've used Viome at all. Viome is something that I've spoken about on the podcast, but you do a gut test and it kind of gives you lots of kind of fairly technical looking information on the gut, and mine came up with some extraordinary stats. For example, the average person has 1% of Prevotella in the gut, and I've got 30% of Prevotella in mine. So I'm thinking it'd be quite exciting to do another test once I've been taking Restore for a while and see if that goes down.
Yeah, that's exactly the right approach. Yeah, so Biome's a great piece. Biome is exciting because it's going beyond just speciation and starting to get into the microRNA, which tells you exactly which bacteria are in a proliferative state rather than kind of a homeostatic state. And so I do like Biome. I think it's a step in the right direction. I think your description is actually pretty apt. It says it looks like a lot of technical information.
Yeah.
The information there is we're still struggling, and this isn't the company's fault, but there's so much data coming out of something like a genomic analysis in the microRNA array of the gut that we don't know entirely what to make of that yet. We are so infantile and the numbers are so grandiose. And so what does it mean that Prevotella is overgrown in your gut? Well, that's probably not a infection of Prevotella. You're probably missing a few other organisms that would naturally keep Prevotella in check. And so that's where you and I both have some excitement about your Biome study is over 3 months period, I expect a huge transition. And we've got a clinical trial going on right now with Restore. And in our initial data back, we were seeing 25% shift in the microbiome, meaning that 25% of 1.5 quadrillion organisms has changed its identity over just 2-week period.
Wow.
And so to see that big of a shift, I mean, in contrast, a probiotic might change it by 0.001%, And so to see a 25% shift where a fourth of the ecosystem has changed its identity in just a short couple of weeks is profound, especially when you consider there's no bacteria or fungi in this thing. And so again, we're turning the gut back to its own inherent innate intelligence and see what happens. Restore doesn't kill cancer cells. Cancer cells naturally kill themselves with enough information. And that's where exercise comes in huge. Nitric oxide, human energy production is reliant on oxygen. And if you start to lack oxygen in a muscle group because you're exercising it to fatigue, to that achy state, your body's going to start releasing nitric oxide, again, a communication molecule. And so this combination of healthy nutrition based out of healthy soil combined with healthy exercise really gets your mitochondrial state, supported by these other redox components outside of themselves.
And what do you think? I mean, it's even other supplements, the ones that seem to be exciting me and working for me at the moment. I've been using this skin spray, which is essentially, it's got bacteria in it, and you spray it on your skin. And I've noticed quite a change in my skin as well. And it just seems to me all these, and then the whole theory behind this spray is, well, you put so much rubbish on your skin, we're just putting some of the bacteria back on there. And, it seems to me that a lot of the supplements and practices that work best for us are the ones that are actually taking us back to our natural state.
Absolutely. And you just hit on a big piece, is that Restore doesn't just work in the gut. And so your body is literally covered with bacteria and fungi. So we have a Sinus product that has become one of our fastest growing
I've got that, but I've not used it yet.
It's profound. You're going to notice a change in the first couple hours of using it.
Really?
So
What?
it's extraordinary.
That sounds like that's a big claim, Zach.
Yeah, I'm confident on that one, Tony.
So, because part of the reason I've been going slowly with the gut is because I know that I've always had a bit of a dodgy gut, so I don't want it to kind of blow up kind of thing.
Yeah, slow is totally fine. The sinuses are going to be really easy and fast to respond. And gut health is inherently dependent on sinus health. So for years we were using the oral before we came up with the nasal preparation. And the issue that's most common in the United States that we see kind of being refractory to probiotics and the usual things is something called SIBO, or small bowel overgrowth.
Yeah.
Where you have abnormal bacteria that are populating the small intestine. This leads to bloating, fatigue, poor digestion, heartburn, all kinds of symptoms. And that SIBO is likely, I think 80 to 90% of the syndrome coming not from the gut, but coming from the sinuses through postnasal drainage. Very few people are breathing through their nasal cavity constantly in a healthy fashion. We tend to do a lot of mouth breathing. And so when you mouth breathe, you get a complete shift in the microflora that's in the bacterial flora and the fungal flora that's in your mouth and in the sinuses. And as you shift to mouth breathing, not doing enough nasal breathing, and you start to get some chronic nasal congestion, you'll start to get this post-nasal drainage. And so all night long while you're sleeping, your sinuses are emptying into stomach and upper small intestine, populating it with a bunch of things like streps and stuff like this that should not be in the small intestine. And so if you start with the nasal, you'll immediately lay a foundation there. So if you've got chronic sinus and nasal problems, you may want to consider starting with your nasal product at the same time as the oral, so you're really getting on top of that quickly.
Okay. And that won't manifest it won't affect the gut if you just squirt it up the nose.
It'll improve the gut indirectly, but you probably want to do the oral to hurry up and protect again. So what does the oral do? We've shown that the oral usage, and this is peer-reviewed science that's published. You can find the publications on our website or whatnot, but we've demonstrated that glyphosate, the main toxicity that it has in the human system is to disrupt the tight junctions, which are the Velcro-like proteins that keep your gut as an intelligent barrier system from the outside world. Sitting behind that gut membrane is 80% of your antibody production, 60 to 70% of your entire immune system. And so you've got this huge immune system waiting to protect this front line of defense. And glyphosate, Roundup, destroys that front line of defense through disrupting the tight junction Velcro. So now you have leaky membranes from the sinuses all the way to the rectum. And then once those compounds enter the body, you also have leaky vascular systems. So the blood vessels are leaking, the blood-brain barrier is leaking, the kidney tubules are leaking from this glyphosate Roundup injury. And so now you've got this whole body that is starting to lose its self-identity, its self-protection barrier systems, and everything's kind of a mess of leak and inflammation and constant responsiveness to your food. So your dodgy gut has nothing to do with a primary gut problem. It's got to do with the fact that the gut can no longer figure out what's outside and what's inside. So it's constantly reacting to just about everything you eat.
Okay, I'll keep you posted on it then.
Yeah, and so with Restore, you'll see an almost immediate response of the tight junctions. Within 16 minutes, we've shown that the tight junctions are strengthening and becoming resilient against the Roundup injury. And so we've now shown that we can go to 20,000 times the amount of Roundup you would typically see in your diet, and we continue to do 100% support of that tight junction system. That's keeping you resilient at the gut lining. It's reducing your immune system's taxation. It's reducing the energy you're putting into managing a single meal. And now you're extracting more energy from the meal. You're getting more of that bioavailable nutrient and fuel into the body, and you're not spending all of that to do damage control.
What about, I mean, you know, it's really interesting hearing you talk about glyphosate and Roundup, and this is something that I've heard many times before. But I know that the company behind Roundup and glyphosate, Monsanto, they're pretty litigious. How do they react to you talking about this on various podcasts? And I know you're headlining the Paleo Effects, I think, which I'm going to be at in the next month. So I look forward to hoping to meet you in person as well. How do they react?
Well, I've been pretty fortunate. I think that, you know, the reality is they have a huge track record of attacking people like Stephanie Seneff, who's from MIT. She's a brilliant scientist and mathematician who's done a lot of the writing on the scientific dangers of glyphosate over the last 20 years. And they've attacked her relentlessly online with trolls and everything else. And the reason they were able to do that is because she's a mathematician and a computer scientist. And so they were able to just lambast her at all corners that she's not a cell biologist. She has no idea what she's talking about. And so that was their approach. Our team at the beginning has come from with so much science that there has been a problem for them to attack. And they're typical trolls. There's actually been documentaries produced about the Monsanto trolls online, these guys that are paid to go out and give misinformation and attack people that are trying to give anti-Monsanto information. So anyway, we've had those interactions with them, but we come with so much science that I think the company has taken the opposite approach to not just us, but anybody now. And it's a growing number of labs around the world that are preaching good science against glyphosate. And not just glyphosate, obviously, the nicotinamides that are killing our bees. I think glyphosate's involved in our beehive collapse syndrome as well. We've got great science going on our meat production system. We actually are developing a product for cattle, things like that.
Great. So what did you say Monsanto are doing? Are they ignoring it?
They're just trying to brush us aside. I think they're right. If they say anything about us, it's going to increase our attention, not decrease it. So I think mum's the word right now on the science, and they're just hoping that things play out. But I don't want to take any credit for this phenomenal thing that we're seeing happen. But you may be aware that Monsanto is being sold to Bayer, which is a German company.
Yeah.
I don't think that that's a coincidence. I think that they see the writing on the wall that the science is building so quickly. Once the World Health Organization was bold enough to state that glyphosate was a probable carcinogen, and they saw all of not just our science, but science from around the world starting to mount against them, I think that it was the thing that tipped their hand towards being willing to sell out. Mm. The terrifying thing about Bayer is that I think the rationale for them spending $66 billion to buy Monsanto is based around their development of a new genetically modified crop called Liberty Link. This is already approved in the US and in the EU, and terrifyingly is already being grown and sprayed with a new chemical that blocks yet another pathway of amino acid production in the human body. And so I think Bayer's making a sweep to try to become the biggest player in owning the world food chain through Liberty Link, and by buying Monsanto, they'll enjoy a big profit margin from selling glyphosate compounds for the next 5 or 10 years until they become illegal. Stephanie Seneff and all of her team, and we tried to pump them a bunch of science for their efforts, but they presented to the EPA in the United States at the end of 2016 when Roundup was being reevaluated by the EPA for food chain use. And it was an amazing amount of data they showed the Congress and the EPA, and it all was for naught. And Roundup became approved yet again for another 13 years of use in the United States.
Yeah.
And so, we cannot trust or turn our attention or hopes on the legislative pathway. It's too laborious. It's too slow. There's not enough time to save our species to rely on those patterns. And so we have to turn to the consumer for the solution. We as consumers are the most powerful force of change on the planet. And if we change our behavior, we start demanding organic food and we start demanding labeling on everything. You guys are doing a great job in the EU of tackling this. I realize you guys are not part of the EU anymore, I think, but
we are at the moment. But it's but sadly we won't be fairly soon. I'm giving away my own voting history on that by that last sentence. But yeah, it won't last for too long. Zach, I'm going to let you go in a sec, and I'm also going to go and spray some proprietary lignite up my nose. But before you go, what is one book that you'd recommend and one tip for more energy, vitality, and motivation?
One book that I would recommend, there's so many great ones. If you want one that's on kind of the power to heal through the gut and everything else, I really like Neil Barnard's program for reversing diabetes. It doesn't matter if you have diabetes or just obesity or any health condition, autoimmune condition, etc. Neil Barnard's program for reversing diabetes is a powerful look at a plant-based approach. It's nice because it's a primer, nice kind of review of all the science of the last 30 years, but it's also a cookbook. So it really gets you started in the kitchen as to kind of how can you start to do this. Now, he doesn't have any microbiome science or anything like that behind it, but suffice it to say that I can say that the microbiome data that we have certainly supports his approach there. So I think Neil Barnard would be a great piece.
Okay.
As far as one recommendation to get more energy in your life, it's simply get outside. Just like the chickens that are being grown in these sunless barns, that's pretty much how we live our lives as humans now. And so think about your day-to-day life. If it happens to be in office cubicles, in your plastic-lined car, and in your homes, then you need to, like the chickens, get outside and get some real sun, breathe some real air that has real microbiome, get reattached to that nature.
Yeah, just like the chickens.
Just like the chickens.
Zach, thank you. We'll be in Austin next month, so we'll come and see you talk and look forward to listening to your talk there and hopefully get to say hello at that point.
I was on there, and then it turns out I'm getting married that weekend, so our dates changed, so my priorities shifted there.
Oh, well, I think it's a good reason for missing Paleo Effects. Yeah. Okay, well, I won't get to say hello to you then, but many congratulations.
Thank you. Yeah, we'll look for you at future events, though.
Thanks, Dr. Zach, and I was right, wasn't I, about the geek rating of 7, but it being worth persevering with, because he really is just so in-depth and brilliant, Dr. Zach, that I really enjoyed talking to him. And sometimes I like the podcasts with the more depth. They're not necessarily the easiest or the most lightweight ones, but they deliver the most content and information, so I hope you enjoyed it as well. Now, before I go, let's have a quick reminder about today's competition, which is a one-off on Zestology. All you need to do, if you would like to win the Juve light, which is worth $1,000, beautiful infrared light, which I've got in my flat just a few meters away from here in Bermondsey Street. It uses the latest LED technology to deliver clinically proven wavelengths for better health. It's funny how many of my friends in London are really excited by these Juve lights and are using it all the time. You know who you are if you're listening to this now. In fact, one of my mates, I think, has actually started up a rival infrared light company. That's how much he likes it. Anyway, we're not giving away his lights, we're giving away the Juve lights, worth $1,000, absolutely clinically proven. They've got some possibly, I think I'm right in saying, the world's top expert in infrared light research is on the board of Juve. And all you need to do is upload a picture to Instagram with you using or talking about your favourite zesty energy hack. So it might be an infrared light, it might be just a book that you're reading at the moment that makes you feel good, or a book that you love, or a workout machine, or some kind of hack to block blue light in the evening. Whatever it is, upload it to Instagram, tag at Zestology, tag at Tony Wrighton as well if you want, and we will then select a winner at random in a week's time, and you might have a new favourite energy hack, all of your own, a Juve light worth $1,000, and we'll ship it anywhere around the world. So international giveaway, open to you to take part in wherever you are. That is it. Just before I go, if you don't want to miss out on links to Restore, that was the most clicked on link of all time in my 3 zesty hacks, 3 zesty things email that I've been sending out each Monday. Then you can head to tonywrighton.com and sign up for that. And that's it. Have a great week. See you next time.